It was supposed to be just another freezing winter morning, but what veteran Jake Miller uncovered beneath the old waterline wasn't a leak. It was a warning, a forgotten Cold War bunker, sealed, hidden, poisoned with secrets meant to stay buried forever. And beside him, a loyal German shepherd who sensed danger long before any alarm ever could. That day, one simple act of curiosity from a struggling mechanic ignited a storm a corrupt corporation thought time had erased. And when the men sent to silence him came for the truth, they never expected a dog to rewrite the ending. Stay till the end, because what Buddy did in that canyon of snow will break you, then heal you in the same breath. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from, because the miracle you hear today might be the strength you need tomorrow. Snow pressed low over Silver Creek, Colorado. A white silence wrapped around a town already exhausted by cold. The storm had aged the city overnight. Rooftops sagged beneath heavy drifts. Streetlights glowed through curtains of ice, and the wind carried the brittle sound of pipes bursting beneath frozen asphalt. In this unforgiving landscape, Jake Miller pushed open the door of his small rented house, stepping into the dawn that glimmered off a world fused in frost. Jake, 45, stood broad-shouldered but tired, his frame sculpted by years in the Army's infantry. A body built for resilience, now worn by repetition and worry. His face bore the sharp edges of someone who had learned to endure rather than retreat. A square jaw, darkened by stubble, a slightly bent nose from a long-forgotten firefight, and blue-gray eyes that looked both present and far away. Those eyes carried quiet storms, memories of Afghanistan that clung to him like a permanent winter. Yet Jake moved gently, the kind of man whose voice softened automatically whenever he spoke to an elderly neighbor or a child. Life had pushed him hard, but he refused to push back at the wrong people. The cold bit through his jacket as he knelt to lace his boots. His truck needed repairs he couldn't afford, his mother's heart medication was overdue, and another letter from the bank lay unopened on the kitchen table. But none of that could stop him from going to work. In a small town where pipes were freezing faster than the city could fix them, the water department depended on him. A sudden thump behind him shook loose a faint smile, one of the rare ones Jake allowed himself these days. Buddy trotted out, stretching his thick German shepherd legs before shaking snow from his coat. The dog was 6 or 7 years old, large and powerful, with warm amber eyes set in a face that seemed carved from loyalty itself. His fur, a rich blend of dark saddle black and winter brown, puffed out like a natural coat built for the Colorado cold. Buddy had been trained as a PTSD support dog, but he was more than that. He was Jake's anchor when the nights turned loud with memories. He woke Jake from nightmares with a gentle paw, leaned into him during flashbacks, and, when things were calm, stole pillows with shameless joy. "Morning, pal," Jake murmured, rubbing the dog's ears. Buddy responded with a contented groan and immediately pushed his weight against Jake's leg, as if reminding him he wasn't facing the day alone. The phone buzzed with a job order, Frozen Maine beneath Old River Park. Bring the excavator. City priority. Jake sighed. Old River Park was abandoned decades ago after budget cuts and riverbank erosion. The water line running beneath it was older than half the town, more patchwork than plumbing. Fixing it meant digging through stubborn permafrost while battling equipment that barely worked in summer. Still, work was work. He needed hours, needed the paycheck, needed to stay. A vote long enough to keep the bank away from his mother's door. As he and Buddy drove through the slick streets, Jake kept one gloved hand on the steering wheel, the other resting lightly on Buddy's head. Snow whipped across the windshield, and the truck rattled with every pothole, sounding like a soldier breathing through old wounds. Buddy watched the white blur outside with alert ears, occasionally nudging Jake when his jaw tightened, his silent reminder to breathe. Old River Park appeared like a ghost through the snowfall, its swings half buried in drifts, trees hunched under ice, and the frozen river beyond lying still beneath a thick sheet of pale blue glass. The excavator sat near the maintenance shed, its yellow paint chipped and dull. Jake climbed in, turning the ignition with fingers stiff from the cold. The machine coughed awake. Buddy circled the site, leaving deep paw prints in the snow, then hopped into the excavator's cab, curling against Jake's leg like a sentry. The heat barely worked, so every breath fogged the air. Jake lowered the bucket, breaking through crusted ice. The ground fought him, refusing to yield. He pushed harder, teeth clenched, the engine roaring in protest. Beneath him, the park felt ancient, like a place holding its breath. As he dug deeper, something tightened in his chest. Not fear, instinct. The same sensation he'd felt overseas in the seconds before a hidden door, a buried device, or a cave that shouldn't be there revealed itself. His heart beat faster. Buddy lifted his head, ears pricked, a low rumble swelling in his throat. The excavator bucket struck something that wasn't rock. Clang. The machine jolted, metal reverberating through the cab. Jake froze. Buddy barked sharply, then jumped down into the snow, racing to the trench. He began digging furiously with his paws, throwing snow behind him in frantic bursts. "Buddy, hey, hold on," Jake shouted, but the dog ignored him completely. Jake leapt out of the cab and knelt beside the trench. His gloved hand brushed against something smooth beneath the snow, a flat metal surface, ice-cold and unyielding. He scraped faster, breath fogging the air, revealing the corner of a buried steel plate. Words emerged from beneath the frost, old lettering stamped into the metal. Project Winterfall, 1964, unauthorized entry prohibited. Jake stared, pulse hammering, snow falling silently around him. The world felt suddenly smaller, colder, as if the winter itself had been waiting for him to find this. And Buddy, standing beside him with snow dusting his muzzle, whined softly as if urging him onward, deeper into a truth buried far longer than the river had been frozen. This was no ordinary water line. It was the beginning of a secret someone had tried very hard to forget. The steel plate groaned as Jake forced the last bolt loose, the sound swallowed by the thickening snowstorm overhead. The wind hissed around him, a cold breath seeping through his jacket, as if the storm itself disapproved of what he was doing. Buddy stood rigid at the edge of the exposed metal hatch, his dense black and brown coat bristling, ears angled forward with an alertness that made Jake's stomach tighten. The dog rarely reacted this strongly unless something truly felt wrong. Jake steadied his breath, though it came out in fogged bursts, and wedged the crowbar beneath the hatch's recessed handle. Muscles hardened through years of military training flexed as he lifted. The metal lid cracked open with a low, ancient sigh, releasing a gush of stale air that smelled faintly of chemical dust and forgotten machinery. A dark square yawned beneath them, a shaft with metal rungs leading down into an abyss that seemed to breathe cold from its depths. Jake turned on his flashlight, the beam slicing into the dark. The light hit steel walls coated with peeling paint, wires suspended like dried veins. His heart thudded once, hard. Places like this, tight, closed, air too still, stirred the worst memories from Afghanistan. Caves, ambushes, unseen threats. For a moment, the tremor in his chest tightened like a fist. Buddy nudged him, pressing his head against Jake's thigh with insistent warmth. The dog seemed to sense the rising tension in Jake's breath, the way he unconsciously shifted his weight backward as though preparing to retreat. Buddy's amber eyes met his, steady, loyal, carrying that silent message he had learned to give. You're here. Stay here. Breathe. Jake exhaled shakily, placed a hand on Buddy's sturdy neck, and forced the rush of old ghosts back into the corners of his mind. He took hold of the ladder and climbed down, boots clanging on metal rungs, chilled by decades of abandonment. Buddy remained above, restless, circling the opening, his paws scraping lightly against the snow. The shaft ended in a small reinforced chamber, the floor slick with frost. Jake swept his flashlight across the room. Pipes ran along the ceiling, some cracked, others wrapped in insulation so brittle it flaked into powder. A single steel door waited at the far wall, its paint chipped to reveal layers of gray beneath. Though the structure was crude, the welds were unmistakably military, thick, precise, made to last. Jake pushed the door. It resisted, then surrendered with a grinding shriek. Beyond it stretched a corridor, barely 6 feet tall, forcing him to stoop. Dust shimmered beneath his flashlight beam. The deeper he walked, the louder his heartbeat became, a drum echoing off metal walls. 30 feet in, he found a small operations room. 3 desks bolted to the floor, rust-coated filing cabinets, a cracked intercom box, and on the wall, a faded poster bearing the Air Force insignia. Another object sat on a center table, a boxy device, resembling a handheld meter. Jake lifted it carefully. The casing was yellowed with age, the glass screen hazy. Beneath it, stamped in block letters, read, Radiation Survey Unit, Model 7A. Jake's breath hitched. His father, Thomas Miller, once an Air Force engineer, used to bring home old manuals and vintage equipment to tinker with, always mentioning Model 7 devices as obsolete survey tools used in Cold War experiments. The thought hit Jake like cold water down his spine. His father had served near Colorado in the 1960s. Could Project Winterfall have been part of his assignments? The flashlight beam passed over a metal clipboard lying half buried under dust. Jake brushed it clean. A page still clung to the clip, its margins curled. Typewritten notes on sub-level integrity and Winterfall containment parameters. Someone had scribbled on the side in hurried handwriting, untidy, cramped, filled with panic. Pressure variance increasing, containment unstable. A chill threaded up Jake's spine, colder than the room itself. He looked around again, suddenly aware of the silence, the deep, oppressive kind that suggested time itself had stopped here the day the facility was abandoned. The metal groaned above him. Snow shifting? Or something else? Buddy barked from the surface, a sharp, echoing alarm that ricocheted down the shaft. Jake's instincts ignited instantly. Something had disturbed the dog, something unwelcome. He grabbed the clipboard and the radiation unit, stuffing both into his jacket. As he turned toward the exit, a soft electronic chirp sounded behind him. He spun, scanning the room. At first he thought it was his flashlight malfunctioning, but the sound came from a small panel on the wall, one that still held a flicker of life. A red bulb blinked faintly, then steadied into a dim, pulsing glow. No. Impossible, Jake whispered. Something, maybe the hatch opening, maybe his footsteps, had activated a dormant sensor. The panel emitted another low chirp, followed by a mechanical click deep within the walls. A system that should have been dead for 60 years had just awakened enough to call out. Jake's pulse hammered as he jogged back through the corridor, climbing the ladder fast enough for his boots to slip once. Buddy's frantic barking grew louder, sharper, as Jake neared the opening. Snow whipped into the hatch mouth, and the wind carried an odd, rhythmic thudding from the direction of the park road. Like tires rolling over hardened ice, he emerged from the hatch, snow stinging his face. Buddy crouched low, staring toward the park entrance, body taut as a drawn bow. Headlights glowed faintly through the curtain of falling snow. Not from a city vehicle, not from anyone Jake recognized. Buddy growled, deep and resonant. Jake closed the hatch quietly, heart pounding, knowing with terrifying clarity one truth. Someone, or something, had heard the signal, and they were already coming. The storm hammered against Jake's windows that night, turning the small rented house into a fragile bunker trembling under nature's fist. Snow lashed the siding, rattling like bones, as if the entire town of Silver Creek whispered warnings through the cold. Inside, Jake sat hunched beside his old cassette player, his breath shallow, eyes fixed on the machine as it played the final trembling words of a dead man, his father. Buddy lay pressed against Jake's leg, his warm weight grounding him as the truth burrowed deep into Jake's chest with icy claws. The voice on the tape had been unmistakable. Thomas Miller, once an Air Force engineer, a man with steady hands and a soft, thoughtful voice, was speaking about clandestine experiments, unstable containment, and threats from unnamed superiors. Jake had grown up believing his father died of heart failure while driving home from base. A tragic, quiet end, the kind that happened to ordinary men. But the quiver in Thomas's recorded voice, the urgent warning buried in every sentence, none of it matched the tidy story Jake had been told as a child. His pulse throbbed painfully behind his ribs. The old wooden floor creaked behind him. For a second, Jake's hand twitched toward the small utility knife on the table, a leftover reflex from too many nights overseas. But it was only the house expanding under the cold. Buddy lifted his head, ears pricking sharply, not at the floorboard, but at something outside, something beyond human senses. A low growl vibrated through the dog's chest. Jake rose, moving to the frosted window. Through the icy blur, he saw a faint pair of headlights sweep across the street, slow, deliberate. Not the plow truck. The lights were too low, too steady. The vehicle idled for several seconds before rolling away into the night. Jake's jaw clenched. Someone had followed him from the park, someone who cared very much about an old Air Force hatch buried under 50 years of snow. His phone buzzed suddenly, startling both him and Buddy. The number was blocked. Against his better judgment, he answered. A woman's voice came through, calm, low, professional. "Mr. Miller, this is Laura Bennett. I'm a journalist with the Denver Independent Review. We spoke briefly 2 years ago about your veterans' housing petition." Jake blinked. He remembered her vaguely, a sharp-minded reporter covering underfunded rural towns. She had been mid-30s, tall and wiry, with chestnut hair usually tied in a messy bun and pale olive skin that contrasted with her dark winter coats. Her brown eyes had been steady, too steady, the eyes of someone who had seen the darker corners of government bureaucracy and refused to look away. Laura had a quiet fierceness to her, the kind shared by people who believed truth was worth bruises. "What do you want at this hour?" Jake asked, though without hostility. "Just fatigue." She hesitated. "I got a tip from a contact in Silver Creek. Apparently a city worker uncovered a restricted military hatch today. I took a guess that it might be you." Jake's heart stuttered. "Who told you that?" "Someone who worries your department's phones are monitored," she replied. Her voice softened, not with pity, but with practical concern. "I came across documents years ago hinting at a Cold War project near your town, Winterfall. Everything was classified. Everything smelled wrong." "I think you found part of it today." Buddy growled again, stepping closer to the door. Jake lowered his voice. "Were you followed?" "No, I drove into town before the storm closed the pass. I'm parked 2 streets away." A pause. "Jake, if what you found today is what I think it is, then you can't be alone in this. And you can't tell local authorities either." Jake rubbed his forehead. The weight of the tape, the documents from the bunker, and now a stranger who somehow knew too much pressed on him like another avalanche. But something in her tone, steady, unflinching, kept him from hanging up. Minutes later, Jake opened his door. Laura approached through the snowfall, wrapped in a thick charcoal gray coat dusted with ice. Up close, she looked even more defined. Sharp cheekbones from skipped meals on deadlines, lines at the corners of her eyes from years squinting at screens and worrying about people she wrote about. She was lean, athletic in a practical way, someone shaped by long investigations rather than gyms. "You look like you haven't slept in days," she said quietly, stepping inside. Jake snorted. "Neither have you." She gave a humorless smile. "Let's compare notes before someone else does." Inside, she listened to the tape with growing alarm, her eyebrows knitting together, her hands tightening around the small notebook she carried. When it finished, she exhaled slowly. "This isn't just a contaminated water line," she murmured. "This is evidence of illegal weapons testing, and possibly a cover-up involving civilian harm." Jake stared at the tape player. "My father warned someone would come after him. He died a week after that recording." Laura's eyes flickered with sympathy, brief, genuine. "And now they might come after you." At that moment, Buddy sprang to his paws, fur rising along his spine. A car door slammed outside. Heavy footsteps crunched across the snowy street. Someone was already in front of Jake's house. Laura whispered, "Turn off the lights." Jake obeyed. Buddy stood rigid, his growl rumbling through the darkness. The voices outside were muffled but male, confident, searching, moving slowly along the porch as if mapping the house. Jake tensed, pulse pounding. But the footsteps continued past his home and faded into the storm. Jake finally exhaled. "They're looking for the hatch." Laura shook her head. "No, Jake. They're looking for whoever opened it." The morning storm had thickened into a curtain of white, swallowing the horizon and muting every sound except the wind's hollow roar. Jake tightened the straps on his heavy coat as he stepped outside, breath streaming like smoke. Buddy trotted beside him, his dense fur glistening with flakes, the dog's posture sharp and vigilant, already sensing this day carried weight. Laura followed close behind, her charcoal coat wrapped tightly around her lean frame, her expression tense beneath the curtain of swirling snow. She hadn't slept. That much was clear. Her brown eyes, usually sharp with purpose, carried the dull glaze of someone running on adrenaline alone, yet her posture remained upright, determined, refusing to let fear crease her resolve. Jake lifted himself into the city's old excavator while Laura stayed outside with Buddy, the dog sitting like a carved sentinel at her boots. As the engine coughed awake, she watched the machine crawl toward the buried hatch. Her gloved fingers fidgeted with a pen out of habit, a nervous gesture, subtle but telling. Years of chasing dangerous truths had carved a quiet toughness into her, but even she seemed unsettled by the events of the previous night. Jake dug quickly, carving a shallow rectangular pit near the hatch without disturbing its metal surface. Buddy paced the perimeter, stopping often to sniff the air, ears twitching at distant sounds hidden beneath the storm's howl. Laura helped by brushing away loose snow, her cheeks reddened by cold, wisps of chestnut hair escaping her hood. When Jake placed the sealed ammunition box, heavy with winter-white secrets, into the ground, Buddy pushed his paws against the snow edge as though trying to help bury it. Jake managed a small smile at the gesture. Laura did too. The moment offered a rare flicker of warmth in a morning otherwise marked by tension. Once the ground was smoothed and the excavator leveled the last of the snow, the site looked unremarkable, just another patch of frozen earth in a forsaken park. Jake stared at it for a long moment, arms folded tightly. "No one will find it here," he murmured, though the unease in his voice suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. Laura stepped closer. "We bought ourselves time. That's all we can ask for right now." Buddy barked once, sharply, as if in agreement, or warning. He stared toward the tree line, body tense, but after a few seconds he lowered himself again. Snowstorm illusions, Jake hoped, though he knew Buddy didn't react to shadows without reason. They returned to Jake's truck, the heater struggling against the cold as the wipers smeared half-frozen flakes across the windshield. Laura kept her notebook open across her knees, scribbling details and timelines. Jake drove slowly, both hands gripping the wheel, eyes scanning mirrors. Halfway back to town, they passed a gas station, the only one still open on the outskirts. Through the snow-smeared window, Jake spotted a man filling his dark sedan. He was tall with an imposing build, shoulders wide beneath a heavy navy overcoat. His hair was shaved close, revealing a scar that cut across his scalp like a pale lightning bolt. His jaw was angular, unshaven, and his skin carried the roughness of someone accustomed to conflict. The man's eyes, ice gray and uncomfortably alert, shifted to the passing truck with slow, deliberate calculation. Jake's stomach clenched. "You see him?" Laura followed his line of sight. "That's not a local." Buddy growled from the back seat, deep and instinctive. The man capped his fuel nozzle, never taking his gaze off the truck. He wasn't just looking. He was tracking. His movements had a stiffness often found in ex-military operatives, or worse, private contractors shaped by morally flexible employers. His expression was unreadable, cold, a face sculpted by strict discipline and recent violence. Jake turned onto the main road, forcing himself not to accelerate. Laura closed her notebook slowly. "We need to assume we're being watched," she murmured. "Whoever he is, he's working for the people who came last night." Jake's knuckles whitened around the steering wheel. "Then they know we're not handing anything over." Back at his house, they triple-checked the locks. Inside, Buddy paced steadily, sniffing along the walls and windows. The dog's tail was stiff, his muscles coiled as though expecting an intrusion. Laura spread her notes and photos across Jake's kitchen table. Documents, digital scans of the engineering manual, timestamps of the tape's contents, and maps she drew by memory. Buddy hopped onto a chair beside her, supervising like an anxious guardian. Suddenly, the quiet cracked with a knock. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Jake froze. Laura's eyes widened for a fraction of a second before narrowing with steely focus. Buddy leapt off the chair and positioned himself in front of the door, every hair raised, teeth bared in a low snarl that vibrated through the floorboards. Jake approached cautiously, holding a wrench instead of a knife, something easier to explain if things went sideways. Through the peephole he saw a woman in a thick tan coat, dusted with snow. She appeared older, mid-60s, her silver hair pinned neatly beneath a wool cap. Her face was gentle, with soft creases shaped by decades of smiling, not scowling. But her blue eyes were sharp, intelligent, and her stance revealed someone used to navigating difficult people. She called out, voice muffled by the storm. "Jake Miller? It's Rosa King, Library Board. Please, open up a moment." Laura whispered, "Who is she?" Jake's expression softened with recognition. "She's harmless. She used to help me research waterline records years ago." But Buddy didn't lower his guard. Jake opened the door a few inches. Rosa stepped in, brushing snow from her coat. She carried a leather-bound folder under one arm and smelled, faintly, of peppermint tea. "Jake," she said warmly, her tone carrying both worry and urgency, "I heard someone broke into the old municipal archive last night, asking about Winterfall. I figured you might need these before someone else gets to them." Jake and Laura exchanged stunned glances. Rosa King, the town's retired librarian, had been following secrets far longer than either of them knew, and she had come here not out of curiosity, but because someone else was already looking. Jake's truck crept through the blizzard like a wounded animal, forcing its way through the dark. The headlights carved narrow tunnels of pale gold into the white void, revealing little except the swirling chaos of snow. His knuckles were bone white around the steering wheel, every muscle tense. Buddy lay hidden beneath a heavy blanket in the cramped space behind the seats, though the dog's slow, steady growl vibrated through the metal floor. He sensed danger. Of course he did. He always did. Beside Jake, the steel ammunition box sat strapped to the passenger seat, a decoy filled with scrap metal and useless bolts. But Jake kept glancing at it, as if the weight of the fake box mirrored the gravity of what he was about to do. Behind the truck, several miles back, Laura Bennett was moving on foot up the opposite ridge of the canyon. She'd insisted on taking the higher ground, claiming she needed an unobstructed vantage point if anything went wrong. Her slim figure disappeared quickly into the storm, but Jake could still picture her, lean, determined, climbing through knee-deep drifts with her dark coat whipping behind her. She carried nothing but a telephoto camera, a small flashlight, and grit carved from years of confronting men who thought their crimes would remain buried. Now, alone in the cab, Jake replayed the phone call that had shattered the quiet of his house. Tucker, a smooth, measured voice hiding violence beneath courtesy. Tucker had spoken with the confidence of a man accustomed to obedience. But beneath the surface, something twisted, something cold and practiced. Buddy had lunged at the air the moment Tucker said Rosa's name. Rosa King, 70 years old, a former librarian with silver hair and a peppermint scent. A woman with gentle wrinkles and a spine made of quiet steel. She'd helped half the town navigate its paperwork over the years, and she had helped Jake too, more times than he could count. Seeing her frightened voice trapped inside that phone call had ignited something raw inside him. Jake's jaw flexed as he drove deeper into the canyon. The storm parted just enough to reveal the jagged cliffs rising on either side, dark silhouettes carved against the swirling white sky. The canyon funneled the wind into sharp howls that scraped across the truck's windows. The tires groaned against icy gravel. Up ahead, faint lights flickered. Not warm lights, harsh ones. Headlamps, flashlights, a controlled glow from a small generator. Jake felt Buddy shift under the blanket. The growl strengthened, rumbling like distant thunder. "It's okay, boy," Jake whispered, though nothing about this place was okay. "Just stay down a little longer." The meeting point was a wide, flat ledge shaped by erosion and winter storms. Snow blanketed everything except a few patches of exposed stone, and in the middle of the ledge stood Tucker. Tucker was taller than Jake expected, well over 6 feet, draped in a heavy black coat that emphasized his broad frame. His hair was a mix of dark blonde and frost, slicked neatly back despite the storm. His face was angular, the kind shaped by privilege and sharpened by cruelty. A thin scar ran from the corner of his mouth to his jawline, giving him a perpetual half-smirk that never reached his cold blue eyes. Those eyes held the detached confidence of someone who had never faced consequences. He wasn't alone. 2 men flanked him, heavily built, wearing tactical boots and plain insulated jackets, but with the unmistakable posture of trained operatives. One had a shaved head and broken nose, the other a trim beard peppered with gray. Neither looked like they'd hesitate before throwing someone into a ravine. Between them, shivering in the wind, hands bound, stood Rosa King. Her tan coat was dusted with snow, her silver hair plastered to her temples, but her posture remained upright. Her blue eyes, usually full of warmth, now glimmered with fear and something that looked surprisingly like defiance. Jake stepped out of the truck slowly, raising both hands to show he carried no weapon. The wind bit at his cheeks. Rosa gasped softly upon seeing him. "Jake," Tucker greeted, voice smooth as polished marble. "Thank you for being punctual. It's refreshing." Jake stared at Rosa, then back at Tucker. "Let her go." "Of course. Tucker said easily, "the moment you hand over the original materials." He nodded at the steel box still strapped inside the truck. "Bring it here." Jake walked to the passenger seat, unstrapped the decoy box, and carried it across the snow. His heartbeat thudded against his ribs. Above him, though invisible in the storm, he knew Laura was watching, her camera trained on this snowy theater. Tucker rested his hands behind his back in an elegant, almost condescending posture. "You've caused quite a stir, Mr. Miller. Project Winterfall is a relic best forgotten. Buried. Dead." He leaned in slightly. "You should have left it that way." Jake kept his face blank. "I just want Rosa safe." Tucker smiled faintly. "A noble sentiment. Hand it over." Jake extended the decoy box. Tucker gave a small gesture. The bearded operative took it, unlatched the steel clasps, and flipped open the lid. Silence, followed by confusion. Bolts, rusted brackets, scrap metal, nothing more. The bearded man snarled. "He's playing us." Tucker's expression didn't change, though a flicker of irritation crossed his eyes. He stepped toward Jake, too close. "You made a very unfortunate mistake." Jake's breath tightened. Rosa shouted through the wind, "Jake, run!" But Jake didn't run. He looked Tucker square in the eyes and said one sentence, steady and clear, "You're not walking out of here with her." And the storm seemed to hold its breath. Snow whipped across the canyon floor in white sheets, carving ghostly patterns through the darkness, as Jake placed the decoy ammunition box on the ground exactly where Tucker had demanded. The metal clinked faintly against the ice, a sound swallowed almost instantly by the wind. Rosa stood several yards away between the two armed operatives, her frail frame shaking from cold and fear. Her cheeks were pallid from the bitter air, her lips tinged with blue, but even beneath the harsh flicker of portable floodlights, she maintained the stubborn posture of someone who had spent a lifetime refusing to bow to bullies. Tucker observed everything with a predator's calm. His black coat fluttered lightly in the wind, the collar rimmed with frost. He carried himself with an air of cultivated power, chin high, eyes half-lidded in contempt, but every movement of his fingers betrayed the simmering irritation beneath his composed surface. Standing closest to the decoy box was his henchman, the one with the broken nose and long, deep scar across his cheek. The man's scar was puckered at the edges, a reminder of some old knife fight or battlefield injury, and his constant sneer suggested he had never forgiven the world for inflicting it. A second henchman, bearded and broad-shouldered, held Rosa upright with a gloved hand gripping her arm tightly. Jake's breath rose in clouds as he stood motionless, waiting. Deep inside him, the instincts of an infantry soldier, buried and quiet for years, had awakened with a cold clarity. His mind calculated distances, movements, angles. Every crunch of snow under the henchman's boots sent a jolt through his spine. The scarred man knelt and flipped open the decoy box. His face twisted instantly with rage. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, kicking the box aside. Rusted chain links, empty tape reels, and random bolts scattered across the snow. Tucker sighed softly, like a disappointed father. "Jake," he said, looking up, "I had hoped for more maturity than this." His voice was smooth, silky, an executioner's whisper tucked behind polite manners. Jake didn't answer. Instead, he lifted 2 fingers to his lips and unleashed a sharp, piercing whistle that sliced through the storm. For a fraction of a breath, nothing happened. Then the truck behind him shook violently. The rear window exploded into a hail of glittering shards as Buddy burst through like a missile of muscle and fur. His thick German shepherd coat bristled in the floodlight glow, black saddle, tan legs, frost clinging to his ruff. He hit the scarred henchman before the man could raise his gun. The impact sent both crashing to the ground in a spray of snow. Buddy clamped down on the man's forearm with a guttural snarl, forcing the firearm into the ice. Everything erupted at once. Tucker reached for his holster, but Jake was already moving. Years of combat training surged through his body, and he slammed his shoulder full force into Tucker's ribs. The blow sent Tucker staggering into the canyon wall, his breath knocked out in a cloud of mist. Their boots scraped violently against the snow-crusted rock as they grappled. "Get off me!" Tucker snarled, but Jake drove his forearm into Tucker's chest, pinning him. Above them, high on the cliff, Laura Bennett braced herself against a jagged rock ledge. Her dark braid whipped around her face as she aimed her telephoto lens downward. Her voice cracked through the howling wind as she shouted into her phone, "Now! Move in now! They have weapons! Repeat! Move in!" Her breath formed frantic plumes as she recorded everything. Buddy's furious attack, Jake's desperate grapple, Rosa's trembling form. Then the sirens began, a rising wail echoing through the canyon like the cry of something ancient awakening. Red and blue lights flickered through the snowstorm as state police cruisers slid down the icy entry path, tires fighting for traction. Officers jumped out with weapons drawn, shouting commands drowned by wind. "Drop your weapons! Hands where we can see them! Get the woman clear!" The bearded henchman let go of Rosa, raising his hands as officers surrounded him. The scarred man tried to shove Buddy off, but officers were already on him, wrestling him down and shouting for the dog to release. Buddy obeyed only when Jake called his name, stepping back with his chest heaving, fur spiked from adrenaline. Snow clung to his muzzle like white ashes. Rosa sobbed with relief as an officer wrapped a blanket over her shoulders. "I knew you'd come, Jake," she whispered through chattering teeth. Tucker, arms twisted behind him, glared at Jake with icy fury. Even with cuffs locked around his wrists, he looked like a man already planning revenge. But the cameras didn't care about his glare. Laura didn't care about his status. The world didn't care about his power anymore. The canyon lights captured everything. A Sioux bin impoverished but unbroken. A kidnapped librarian, 2 armed contractors caught red-handed, and Buddy, coat dusted with snow, chest rising and falling, standing guard with the righteous ferocity of a creature who loved his human more than his own safety. Within 24 hours, news channels across the nation were replaying the footage. Jake Miller became the reluctant face of truth. Buddy became a national hero. Project Winterfall became the scandal no official could bury. The federal government issued carefully crafted statements about experimental errors of a past era. The corporation behind Tucker denied involvement, sacrificing its own employees as rogue elements. But the digital files Laura uploaded, plus the broadcast footage, had spread far too widely to contain. Public support surged, donations poured in. Jake's crushing debt was forgiven, and the city created new programs for veterans and families harmed by long-term water contamination. Jake was offered a position as a safety consultant, steady work with purpose but without bullets or explosions. Buddy received his own ceremonial badge, which he proudly wore, though he still preferred stealing toast, hogging the sofa, and snoring like a small freight train. Children gathered around him on Main Street to give him treats he absolutely did not need. On a quiet night weeks later, Jake walked with Buddy along Silver Creek, now thawing beneath gentler weather. Beneath snow and ice, hidden deep in the ground, the true evidence remained buried in its steel box, waiting, guarding the truth for the day it might be needed again. Jake paused, rubbed Buddy's ears, and murmured, "It's done, Buddy. We may still be broke, but we're not powerless anymore." Buddy sneezed, wagged his tail, and pulled Jake forward along the snowy path, toward a future no longer defined by silence, fear, or buried lies. In the quiet stillness after the storm, as Jake and Buddy walked beneath the falling snow, it felt as though the world itself paused to breathe. A reminder that even in the harshest winters of our lives, light can still break through. Some people call it luck, others call it fate. Jake knew better. Sometimes God sends His miracles not wrapped in thunder or fire, but in small, loyal shapes, like a German shepherd who refuses to let his human fall. And maybe that's the truth hidden beneath all our struggles, that we are never as alone as we fear, that love can be a shield, and that God often works through the quiet companions He places beside us. When life feels cold, when the world seems buried under weight you cannot lift, remember Jake and Buddy's journey, how even a tired man with nothing left can rise again when love, courage, and God's grace walk beside him. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to share it with someone who might need a reminder of hope today. Leave us a comment. Tell us what miracle you're waiting for, or one you've already lived through. And if you want more stories that celebrate faith, loyalty, and the unexpected ways God protects us, please subscribe to our channel. May God bless you, protect your family, and place His gentle hand on the path ahead of you. And may every viewer here find a buddy of their own, a miracle disguised as a friend.